Hello, and welcome to Study Abroad Conversations. I'm Stacy Shimizu, Director of IWU's International Office. Today's topic is the Illinois Wesleyan London program, which launched 20 years ago. And joining us today is an alumnus from that program, along with two more recent participants and our 2021 program director. I'm going to ask my guests to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to bow out of the conversation to let them talk about their experiences in London.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Lily Bjerkan. I'm currently a junior at Illinois Wesleyan University. I'm a history major, and I was on the London program in 2019.
Hello, my name is Kalen Grey. I'm a recent alumnus, I guess, class of 2020, and I went on the London excursion in 2017.
Hello, my name is...
I was a financial service major too as well. Sorry about that, Wilson.
No worries, no worries. Hello, folks. I am the old guy in the room. My name's Wilson Muscadin. I am a graduate of 2003. I did the inaugural IWU London program in the year 2000. I was a business major.
All right. Well, my name is Noel Kerr, and I teach in the School of Nursing here at Wesleyan. And Wilson, I've got the years on you. I graduated my undergraduate degree in 1983 from San Jose State University in California. And I am the director of the London program for 2021. I'm very excited about that.
Okay, Dr. Kerr, I actually just had a question about your course. It sounds so interesting. I know Stacy, before we started talking, talked about how you're going to be going to Normandy and all those things. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Sure, absolutely. I am really excited about this course. I'm calling it Medical Mystery Tour, and it is going to be an overview of the history and progression of areas of medicine like surgery and treatment of trauma and public health, probably with a little bit of nursing thrown in there as well, since that's my background, but it's really geared toward people who are either thinking about going into medicine and want to hear about how things were in the old to present day, or for anyone that's interested in that kind of history, because London has a myriad of things that relate to that subject. So lots of exciting things to see. Some of the places that I'm going to take students in London, an example would be, we'll take a day to go to the Chelsea Physics Garden to talk about herbal medicine and how that's applied. And then since unfortunately the timing is really great to go over and talk about public health, we're going to take a walk around John Snow's map of London and go to the pump, the famous water pump where the plague began in London, and talk about how was a pandemic handled at that time, and compare it to what we're doing in different places of the world with the pandemic now with COVID-19.
Wow.
And as Stacy told you, the London, the trip that's associated with my program will be focusing on advancements in the treatment of trauma. Specifically, what have we learned from wartime trauma that can be applied to treating any kind of trauma? And to do that, we'll be traveling to Normandy, France, to go to Utah Beach and look at the memorials there. I'm hoping that that might be able to be timed around Remembrance Day in London, where we'll be able to take part in the festivities that occur there.
I did the study abroad program in last fall, so I was packing up this time last fall.
Before the world closed down.
Yeah, before the world decided that it needed a global pandemic. I always took, what did I take? Oh goodness, art history with Linda Bolton, who's amazing. I took the London Global Studies course and Shakespeare, which is really fun. And Kalen, was that similar to you, or was that like a little different?
Pretty much similar classes. I definitely loved art history with Linda. One of my other classes was London, basically a world city. So it was kind of going through its global impact, the cultural impact of all of the different ethnic backgrounds being there, and just kind of the overall development of the city. Her name was Nicole. I can't remember her last name.
Nicole Moody.
Um,
Yeah.
So I took that course, and then my last course was the Shakespeare course too with Patricia. So
Patricia.
it was definitely a lot more art based, and I was gonna ask Dr. Kerr that question, and she kind of got to it. So yeah.
I will say just quickly on my end, I can't remember exactly the classes and what they were named because this is 20 years ago. But I know that I had a British history class, and funny enough, I actually his name just popped in my head as you were talking, Lily. His name was Richard Thames, like the Thames River, and our British history class was taught out of the British History Museum because our class was off of Tottenham Court. It was right down the street from the British History Museum. So that course was amazing, and never learned history that way. It was amazing. I do remember there was more of an arts history. So it was basically about the arts British plays. So we basically saw plays every week, and I remember we took a trip to Stratford upon Avon to learn about Shakespeare and that kind of thing. So, but in every single one of those classes, I think the thing that was different for me was it was the first time where it was more experiential learning, meaning that like sort of the way that we teach history or the way that we teach a lot is, through the text. And by being there is like the text came alive. One, it came alive, but two, typically when you're learning history, I remember at some point I had memorized all the kings and queens from William the Conqueror and Elizabeth II, but that's neither here nor there. But there's what you don't get out of the textbook a lot of times is the context upon which that history is founded upon. And so when you're in the British Museum or you're at you're on the battlefields. For instance, Dr. Kerr, you mentioned the going to Utah Beach. Like when you're there, you learn so much more context upon which those lines that are coming out of the history book. So it makes it come alive. I think that's one of the things that my big takeaways from those experiences is it was a completely different type of learning, which still resonates with me 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree with that. I think some of the best lessons I learned in London, especially when looking back at my art history course or global studies, is when we were going out and having discussions in front of a beautiful piece of art or something, or going and visiting a place that has historical significance when you're talking about the history of English tea and seeing physical ships. It's so much different than sitting in a classroom and looking at a projector, taking lecture notes. And I love lectures. I'm a history major. I sit in class all day to listen to my professors talk about everything and write it down and be totally okay with everything. But getting that world experience and going out into the world and going to museums and places, I think was the most beneficial thing for me. And most out of getting to live in Europe for 4 months, because there's never going to be a time in your life again that you're going to be able to do that. That's what I want to do after school. I don't know if it'll happen, but I'm so grateful for the IWU opportunity, or for the opportunity that IWU gave me to get to be in London for 4 months and truly live my best life.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that, I talked about the experiential learning before, so I'd echo both Kalen and Lily in getting out of the classroom as much as possible and having that experiential learning, because those are the things that I, particularly 20 years out, remember, and that impacted me. Oftentimes the lessons that we're learning outside of the classroom or outside of the classroom structure are as important than what we're learning inside. And what I mean by that, and I'll give you a particular example, for me, as a 19-year-old kid going overseas, one of the reasons that I went to study abroad is, at the time I was 19, I'm just developing, trying to understand who Wilson is as a person, as a man, as an American. And I wanted to learn of what that looked like in a different context. who am I outside of these, you know, comforting structures around me? Like, am I different in a different context as I try to understand myself? So for me, some of the learning was about London and the experiences that we're learning about, but also was equally important to learn about myself and who I am as an individual. And so we're going to do a lot of stupid things over there. We're going to experiment. We're going to, you know, break curfew and all kinds of things. I'm sorry to say that, but you know, there's all kinds of stupid things that we're going to do.
Having been to Hawaii several times with students.
but allow us some leeway to, because those boundaries and whatnot, those lessons are what's really important. And I'll give you just one small example. And when I was over in London, that was it was identity shifting for me, in terms of it was the first time I had been in an environment where people saw me as American first and Black second, right? So so I was there in 2000, so this was the Bush-Gore elections, right? And so I distinctly remember experience walking into a pub, and you can't see me, but I'm actually 6'6". So I'm hyper aware that that my presence oftentimes intimidates people, particularly here in this country, right? And so in fact, I wear glasses and smile a lot, so people are less intimidated by my presence, right? And so so I'm in a pub in London. I sit down, and I know that, you know, I'm pretty sure nobody's going to talk to me. I'm just going to sit down and get my drink, and I just wanted to try Guinness, actually, right? So I sit down, and as I'm ordering, there are people that are a couple chairs down, and they immediately engaged me, introduced themselves. They had all kinds of questions for me because they heard my voice, they heard my accent, and they were like, "Oh no, we got to talk." I think I was there for probably 3 hours, and I don't think I paid for anything. And so I had never had an experience like that, where people were so interested in the fact that I was American and were less intimidated by me being Black than they were interested that I was American. So, and I'm not saying that obviously their BLM protest in London, Europe has its racial issues. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that for me, that was the first time where I was like, oh wow, like I'm American here. And so that was just a identifying experience for me that I'll always remember, because when I came back, one of the things it taught me was, one, how American I am and how American we are, how much more we have in common, even though we look different. But the other thing was, wow, like that was a completely different interaction. I felt more safe walking the streets of London than I do walking the streets of Chicago or New York or all the other places that I lived in New York, because they saw me as American. Right? I was American. Definitely a whoa kind of moment for me that I didn't expect to experience, but definitely experienced while I was there.
Wow.
I could speak to that. I think a lot of times too, we did a lot of things as a group. So oftentimes people would approach us and be like, "Oh, you're American, right?" And we always be like, "Oh, how did you know? How did you know?" We walked in big groups. We took up the sidewalk. We were loud. Like, so I do understand where you're coming from, where you say like when you're overseas, not even just in London, you're American first and kind of almost Black second. Because they're more intrigued by the accent. They're more intrigued by, okay, similar to you had Bush and Gore. We were coming off of Trump and Clinton. So they're more intrigued by what's going on over there. What's wrong with you guys? Like, so those were a lot of the questions. But I did notice a lot of times when I would be on my like solo excursions and I would do things like I would take the train and go to Brixton. I didn't really go through that as much because there's a ton of people walking around that look just like me. So it kind of I think you said earlier too, is, you know, teaching the context, and like location is also a lot of context and a lot of our experiences. So when we would be walking around, you know, the more touristy areas of Westminster, you get those questions a lot about being an American and not necessarily being a Black American. But when you're in Brixton, you blend in. You find a way to be normal and not have to explain that experience to others, because they're looking at you like you're just one of the other Black British people walking around.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. It's interesting.
it was definitely eye-opening and insightful to just understand.
Could the three of you give some advice to students who might be thinking about studying abroad in London or Spain, who might have fears or financial barriers that might make them quicker to say no than to actually pursue it? What would you tell those students?
I guess I can go first. I pay for my own education. I do student loans. I apply for scholarships in my free time. And London was something that I remember one of my friends was really trying to pressure me. He's like, "Oh, go to London. You're going to love it. You have to come with me. Like, let's go." But you have to you will be able to find a way to make it work. Like, there's never again that you will be able to go abroad, live somewhere, get the education that you're gonna get, this like the live in the comfort that you're gonna live in, be like have the experiences that you can like that ever again. Like, the money might seem big when you're trying to figure it out and plan it out, but at the end of the day, I would not trade a single second of being abroad for anything else.
Thanks, Lily.
Yeah.
I can go. I think on the financial end, for me, it was definitely a daunting figure at first, but I kind of made it work. I understood that, you know, this was an experience that I was willing to pay for and actually invest in myself. But just for the potential, you know, students who would like to go, you have to understand there are tons of different scholarships out there. I personally received one that came directly from IWU. It was the Betty Richards Scholarship. But, you know, there's other scholarships such as the Gilman who will, you know, give you a little more money than IWU does in most cases. And those are just two that are off the top of my head going to be like, you know, some that would pretty much help you cover a lot of their expenses. And a lot of people that I know outside of the London program have received to pay for their experiences. With scholarships, grants, and maybe a few loans sometimes if you have to, you can make it work. And it'll be one of the best experiences you had over your 4 years at IWU. I can promise that.
So I would chime in from my experience, and I have to disclose that I professionally, I help people with their finances. So I'll bring that context a little bit to it. So one thing, so oftentimes I'm coaching people that have like a lot of student loans, for example, and it's very concerning for them. And one of the ways that I help people in terms of the context, remember I talked about context before, is that if you just take a simple example, and let's say, you know, you graduate from IWU and you make, let's say $50,000 a year. And let's say you never get a raise throughout your whole career, never get a raise, never make another dollar. That's 40 years, 40 years times $50,000, that's $2 million. And so if you think about the investment into this program, into this study abroad program for 4 months, as compared to $2 million that you're going to earn, and obviously you're going to make more than 50,000, obviously you're going to make, you're going to have raises over years. So that's a worst case scenario. Then if you think about it in the context of that $2 million, then we're talking, we're talking about an investment in yourself as opposed to a huge expense, right? So I know the expense is daunting, but the investment into yourself is much more. And that's one of the reasons why I talked about the sort of shifting of the identity for me, because these are the types of experiences and learnings that make you unique as an individual, that you can take that experience of, hey, I didn't spend my 4 years of school inside of a classroom. I spent it in different environments, and that gives me a different perspective. And I also have unique experiences that I can bring to the table wherever I land after this IWU experience. And so I think those are the types of things that you want to invest in. If you're going to spend all this money for education, you actually want to have those types of experiences where you can say, because I did this, I have this range of experiences and knowledge that are above and beyond the classroom. So that's how I would think about it and look at it in terms of do I want to embark on this investment? Because it's really daunting, it looks really expensive, but you have to think about it in the broader context of which, again, we can, the 20 years later, this program is what I remember most about my IWU experience 20 years later. And so that's what I would say about making that investment.
Fantastic.
I say kind of to close too, leaving London let me know that I came back to the States as an entirely different person. I wouldn't say entirely, but I saw a lot of growth in myself. And I think that that's one of the best benefits of this program is that you will come back and witness your own social blossoming, your own global blossoming, your own artistic blossoming. Me, for example, I did not care at all about theater, art history, none of it. But I came back and I caught myself wanting to go see the plays at, IWU's theater, wanting to go and look at the exhibitions in Ames Art Building, like different things of that nature that kind of made me a more well-rounded individual due to the program. And I think that, if you can find a way around the financial burden that what Wilson was saying about this being an investment in yourself and your own experiences in life, is well worth it. Due to that, you will come back realizing that that was probably one of the best things you could have ever done, and let alone college, but your own life, due to the growth and the sheer number of experiences you'll have while abroad. So hopefully you all who are watching can go and explore like we did.
Thank you all so much for this conversation. It's been wonderful eavesdropping. I've been to London many times. I am counting the days until I can go back. And I imagine that each of you also, London holds a special place in your hearts. Thank you for sharing. And I don't want to take up more of your time, but I think your advice to the students has been wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting us. Thank you so much. It was so fun to reminisce and talk.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.